when you first talk about Apple opening the Apple stores in China is that they just didn't understand China at all. Could you talk a little bit about the yellow cows? And
yeah, this is my favorite narrative. So we know what's funny is when I was researching and writing this narrative, it didn't seem to tie up to the thesis at all. I mean, the thesis is really about operational efficiencies and the political deals to make the operations happen. And then it was after I submitted the manuscript that this entire detour, which I just included because it was so fascinating, ended up being instrumental to sort of solving the riddle of why CCP attacks Apple in early 2013. So, oh gosh, the yellow cows is such a wide narrative. So I don't know how much detail you want here, but effectively, I write this sympathetic portrait that Apple builds the first Apple store solely for the Beijing Olympics in 2008. They're basically offered this piece of real estate. They haven't bid for it or anything. It's just sort of handed to them. And they think, okay, well, this is probably going to lose money for years because China's a poor country. It's a big country, but it's a poor country. And at a time when Steve Ballmer is laughing at the idea that Americans are going to buy a phone for $500 or $600, why would a big developing country pay the same rate? So they don't think it's going to work out. But it's a marketing effort in front of the Beijing Olympics. Instead, it's successful from the start. And it's so successful that by 2010, they've got 3 more stores in the country. So 2 in Beijing, 2 in Shanghai. When the iPhone 4 comes out, and you have to remember there's a lag. The iPhone 4 comes out, and then 3 months later, it comes out in China. So there's already all this anticipation building. And the Chinese just kind of go gaga for this product. But it's different from the American stores where you have early adopters standing outside the stores. Who begins to get really excited about these is these yellow cows, basically these scalpers that in some cases are backed by the triad organizations, so organized crime. And what they recognize is that in a country of 1.4 billion people and only 4 stores, right, 1 store per 350 million people, there's this massive supply-demand imbalance. And so they want to buy 10,000 phones per day if they can, and go sell them into a city that has no Apple stores. Because the people that are buying them, the Chinese know more than us about how many forgeries are in the market. So they only want an Apple product if it comes with an Apple Store receipt and is in a sealed box. They don't sort of trust it otherwise. So these yellow cows end up paying migrants, busing them in, and then having them snake around the store by the thousands to buy as many iPhones as possible. So Stanley Tun ends up selling 25,000 iPhones a day, having to close the store every day to iPhone sales around 12 p.m. or 1 p.m. just so that people can still have an experiential Steve Jobsian experience of the store. So this is just the beginning of the narrative, and I don't know how much detail I want to go into or how much time you want me to take, but it's effectively the yellow cows are, in the earliest stages, they're actually doing something quite helpful to Apple. I mean, they're the de facto distribution arm for Apple products around China, which would be a costly, difficult endeavor. And they're just taking it on for Apple for free, of course. But they're doing it at these scalped up, higher prices. And then the history of the yellow cows going back to the late 80s, early 90s is that they get more sophisticated with time, and you have elements that are more interested in forging in the case of rail tickets in the 1990s, forging the cardboard and the building tickets using proprietary machines and stuff. And in the case of iPhone, they begin taking apart the phones, hollowing them out, and then replacing the parts with lookalike parts. And they're able to do this so well that the Genius Bar is confused about what is a real phone, what's a tampered with phone. And then to make things even more confusing, they begin to buy phones from outside of China and smuggle them in because there's a 20% value-added tax within China. So that's sort of step 1 of how to get cheaper iPhones in big quantities and then sell them somewhere else across China. But they get even more sophisticated, which is that they work with a company like T-Mobile or Verizon that offers iPhones for 24-month contracts. And they're able to begin acquiring phones using fake IDs where they only pay for 1 month of the 24 months. So they're acquiring iPhones for less than $100 and then still going to a place like Chongqing, population 32 million, and selling them for $800, $900. So illegally, they're finding ways to get more money per iPhone than Apple is. So there's this wild narrative, and there's more to the story. This is 3 or 4 chapters in the book. So I don't know that I need to say more about it, but I'm talking too long, so I'll let you ask a question.
Well, I mean, there's another important piece to this, which is that they're buying these phones abroad, right? And they have to tamper with them essentially to get them to work. They don't automatically work with the Chinese telecom system.
Correct.
So there's this whole scam that you talk about how they're tampering with them and how that causes the problems for Apple trying to like handle these returns.
Yes. So they're zapping the processor with these factory connections. So they're rendering the phone inoperable, but at the same time, they are like electronically masking its retail market of origin. So you can no longer see that it was purchased by, some fake name in Oregon where there's no tax, no sales tax. And so the Genius Bar is totally flummoxed by this originally. So they're seeing a phone, they can confirm that it's brand new, and they don't know why the processor doesn't work. Essentially, Apple says like, our bad, and they give the people a brand new phone. And, a source of mine says this was like cocaine to the yellow cows. They were making a killing. Apple eventually catches wind of this, but it's still not clear what they should do. I mean, it's difficult for them to prove that the phone has deliberately been tampered with. And it literally takes them between 2010 and around 2018 to finally solve this problem. Okay, so this is a multi-billion-dollar 8-year effort. And what they end up doing is serializing every component in the phone to the motherboard. So in the West, this was considered like a sort of strongman move on the part of Apple, because if you're a right to repair activist or just someone who thinks it should be easy to replace the screen, this was like really, really difficult. Cost you all sorts of money and complications that you can no longer just get a third-party part and replace, the battery or whatever with your iPhone. But the reason Apple was willing to take that hit was that they had to put a stop to these factory triad connections in China that they were dealing with for almost a decade. But I mean, to get a sense for how sophisticated the yellow cows were, Apple they're sort of playing this cat and mouse game for years, where the yellow cows would get more sophisticated and Apple would try to track them. And Apple eventually is able to introduce like X-ray style machines that give them a near atomic view into the iPhone. And only through that way could they determine this phone is tampered with, this phone is not tampered with. The yellow cows were even replacing the IMEI numbers. And so what would happen is someone at the Genius Bar would look up the IMEI that the phone says it is, and they could find out this phone, the real IMEI, is actually activated and in use in New York. Therefore, the phone I'm holding in my hand is a tampered with unit. So it's totally wild. And the reason this sort of dovetails with the rest of the book or the prologue is that in March 2015, within 36 hours of Xi Jinping becoming president, Apple is attacked by CCTV, sort of state-sponsored CNN. And then over the following 3 weeks, after Apple issues a sort of weak response, just saying like, we offer incomparable products, and our warranty policies are the same around the world because they've been attacked that they have these inferior warranty policies. There's what I call a digital blitzkrieg, where they are really taken to task in social media. Regulators are making nasty statements, and other newspapers, including the People's Daily, are complaining about Apple's unparalleled arrogance or incomparable arrogance on the front page, right? Millions of people read that paper. Apple's sales during this time basically freeze and then begin to decline. And I got an internal document that talks about it being the first major decline in Apple sales in a decade. So it really does begin to affect their bottom line. And Tim Cook has to apologize. But the origins of why the CCTV and indeed the CCP is so upset has never really been worked out, but it's directly related to these yellow cows, because as Apple begins to take these countermeasures and as the yellow cows are no longer getting a new phone with an apology and a sealed box and a new receipt, they're instead getting a refurbished phone. This is the origins of the we're being treated in an inferior way claim. And so this whole narrative that's sort of like, I thought of as just like a fascinating detour, ended up being, and I realized this after submitting the manuscript, right? Ended up being the very reason why Apple had such political trouble in 2013 and why they were seen as this exploitative force that was taking advantage of China. So I feel like it was this major riddle that I solved after submitting the first manuscript. So as an author, it was just like an absolute delight to sort of figure out this narrative.
Yeah, that's very interesting because that also shows the connection the CCP has with triads, that they were upset that these scalpers.
Oh, I don't know that the CCP knew. Like, they just knew that people were complaining, right? Like, but they didn't necessarily know that these were scalpers. I
would say there's probably there's already a lot of connection.
We've hit the limits of my sourcing here, by the way. I don't know exactly what was said, but the complaints were exacerbated by the fact that there were actually thousands, and this sounds crazy, but there were thousands of fake Apple stores in the country as well. And some of the stores, only a few of them, I should say, probably we're talking dozens here, But there were so many fake stores that Apple employees had WhatsApp groups where they were taking pictures of other stores that they found and comparing them because they thought it was kind of funny. These are like lower level people who weren't really directly impacted, right? But some of the stores were so sophisticated that the very employees thought they were working for Apple, and they were not. But you can imagine if Shelly came into my fake Apple store with a broken iPhone, I'm not going to give her a new phone or fix the screen in any sort of free way because this is all just a grift. And so it's those complaints as well that made their way up to CCP. And basically, just to put this in simple terms, this is the moment when Apple realizes we're in way over our head here. We don't have anybody senior living in the country. We don't understand Chinese culture, politics. We don't understand our distribution problem. We need to change this immediately.
I mean, yeah, I'm glad you had that yellow cows part in your book because the whole thing is so China. Like from the beginning of like trying to set up a Apple store, and what they have to do is like go buy a sewing repair shop so that they can like use that business license to like use for the Apple store. It like the whole thing, and like trying to do crowd control and then realizing that these people are all scalpers. They're not actually there because they're Apple fans. Like the whole thing just is, it's so China.
Right.
That was just one clip from our hour-long podcast. I invite you to watch the whole thing at our community platform, ChinaUncensored.tv. We rely on your support to keep making this podcast, so join us and you'll get all the full-length podcasts, audio downloads, exclusive live streams, and lots more stuff. So go to ChinaUncensored.tv and subscribe. I'll see you there.